Start the live broadcast then, please, Luke. Okay, good evening, everybody. We're broadcasting live. Welcome to the Housing and Community Select Committee. Before we start the meeting proper, in 2017, 72 of our neighbours and friends died in the Grenfell fire tragedy. So I suggest that we start the meeting with 72 seconds of silence. Thank you. Thanks very much. We have two apologies for absence. Firstly, Councillor Ali, the chair of the committee, who is off sick but making a full recovery. He sends his compliments to us tonight and he expects to be back with us for the next meeting. And Councillor Rossi, who was expected to be here but has also gone off sick this afternoon, but has sent some questions for the papers. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Gardner.
Yeah, I'm trustee of the Clement James Centre, which is one of the recipients of council grant and the community's paper.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Any declarations? We haven't. Right. Minutes of the last meeting. Any comments from anybody, or shall I sign them on behalf of the chair? And I'm also very grateful to the council for providing written answers to the questions we tabled in the last meeting for those of you who were involved, so from the Housing Department. Thank you. So that brings us to item A5, which is the first paper of the night on fire risk management. So who's going to come to the table for that one?
Peter.
Oh, no, you said.
So, Councillor Taylor-Smith, do you want to introduce the and then introduce the item and get
Yes.
questions?
So, short introduction, really just to say we bought a last report in March 22, and this is obviously an update. It's an update now that we have the Fire Safety Act and the Building Safety Act, which have both been completed and are now in place. So the paper sets out really the responses that we make on issues which don't just arrive on those acts, but generally, and I think highlights at the moment for me are that we've obviously got a consultation and training really on all assets of Type 5 which have the shape, which is very reassuring, and it shows our commitment to ensure our homes are the safest they can be. But otherwise, I'm very happy to open questions, although I'll turn to Dan and say if there's anything you want to add.
Okay, let's go straight to questions.
Fine, in which case, well, the first question, I'm going to ask Councillor Ross's question on her behalf, and then I'll go turn to the members in the room. So she's on page 15 of the bundle, paragraph, or it's section 5 of the table on personal emergency evacuation plans. And she's asking, is there any intention to provide these for buildings under 18 metres in height?
I think as it states at the moment, we are currently looking at specifically buildings over 11 metres already, but I'm not sure. I'm looking at Peter to say, is there any intention to go beyond 11 metres? I know we're talking to a lot of individuals who are identifying when they're in need in terms of having to, for us to obviously put in place arrangements for them, but whether or not we're going to do that blanket on all buildings, I'm just...
Excuse me, we're writing to all residents regardless of the home they live in, and that's going to tie in with the vulnerability agenda that the council have, which I believe Doug Goldring, Director of Housing Management, is leading on. So we're going a bit more broadly than the legislation to ensure that we're aware as far as possible, and as we all know, it's a snapshot in time to an extent of who's living in our buildings and what supports they may need.
Sure, thank you very much. I can't ask a supplementary on her question, but let me turn to the committee members and see who wants to go. Councillor Garland first.
I had questions before that, but as we're on that paragraph,
Yeah.
I'll stay with it. A couple of questions arose. Why is the information redacted? And could we not actually get that consent at the time when we're getting a P? So that actually we can pass the information, because it's nothing worse than you go to a flat, I mean, fire brigade goes to a flat to exercise a P, and actually they evacuate whoever it is, but actually it's not the person who needed the care. So actually if they can say, Mr. Smith or Mr. what have you. So the linked question with that is that I've been working on the flood working group, and it comes across very clearly that the organisations, the council, Thames Water, the MP, all collected various bits. They couldn't share them because of the data protection. So you go, can we not challenge the data protection Act so that actually we can cater for this in advance, so that we get the consents, we get a borough-wide database, and then the information is all loaded there. So that actually, for example, if a resident does move to a different estate or to somewhere else in the borough, that information on their needs is still there, but can be adapted for the new place. It just strikes me as, could we have a one-stop shop for it with data privacy covered?
What the information that is provided to be shared is an indication of what support the person might need. So it might not have their name, address, and date of birth, but they might say if it's an older person, etc. But it will do is will say that somebody has mobility issues and will need help to move. So obviously the vendors would have that information. They just wouldn't have all their personal information. So I think redacted means that it's not completely impersonal.
But you don't know that the person you have just evacuated is indeed the person who needed assistance. That Mrs. Smith might have moved because the fire brigade doesn't know the name because it's been redacted. So I'm actually going, could we not make this a more useful tool that you actually do have the name, you do share the information, and that whoever has given you you agree to keep with the resident, but actually they consent.
And I think that might be why there's a group within the councils that's looking at data on vulnerabilities and sharing that information. And sorry, as I said before, Doug Goldring, the Director of Housing Management, I think has been tasked with working with other people across the council and other agencies to see, so I think we appreciate that there is a challenge about data protection, and I think this group that's been established is about seeing if we can do anything more, provide more information in a way which is acceptable to different organisations.
As you say, Councillor, it's not so much a question of challenging data protection legislation as kind of making it stay within the tram lines. So as you say exactly, one of the ways to do that is to be very clear at the point that you are collecting information what you're going to use it for, because then that then potentially gives you much wider scope to share it on exactly the lines that we're talking about. I guess the other thing I'd say specifically about premises information is that to a certain extent, we are taking our lead from the fire brigade about what the information that's in there, what they need in there to do their job, if you like. Because those kind of judgments about what information you need to do that operational job in the moment that you're evacuating is for them to advise us on. If you see what I mean, not for us to tell them what they need. So to a certain extent, what we put in the information box is driven by the requirements that they give us. To the extent that we then bump into data sharing challenges in providing even with that information, then clearly we need to be, I don't know what the right word is, but kind of to find the right way to navigate the data protection legislation in order to be able to give them opinion, because there's absolutely no point in us in us having a PIB and kind of, as it were, ticking that box if what's in the PIB is not the information that the fire brigade need to use in that emergency situation. So I think probably we need to just go away and check exactly what that information is that the fire brigade thinks they need, and have to do some assurance that that is indeed what we're providing in the PIBs. But it would not be for us. It would be a mistake, I think, for us to make a judgment about what the fire brigade needs in that situation. Does that make sense?
But I think I'm querying to what extent that information is up to date, or by the time it's in the box, actually, if the fire brigade are going into a flat to help out, but actually because they don't know the identity, they know there's somebody there with a mobility issue, but actually there might be 6 people there with a mobility issue on a particular incident. How do they know that they've actually got the person that they were meant to be? And as a result, you kind of go, well, actually, if you ask a fire brigade question, would it help to know the identity of the person? I'd be surprised if they said no.
Yeah, and I see exactly what you're driving at. I mean, in a way, the point you're making seems so clear to me that I'd be surprised if the fire brigade didn't want that information in the first place, if not to ask the question. I mean, of course, the wider point you're making about how it's a snapshot of information, and of course, what a premises information box is never going to account for is people who may be visiting at the time that an emergency may occur. So it's never going to be a perfect and exhaustive set of information about people who've been in the block, or for that matter, people who are in the block who may need assistance. But it's a very solid starting point. But the challenge is the right way is, for all that that's true, there are clearly steps that we can take to make sure it's as accurate as it possibly can be given those constraints.
And I think also just to add to the answer, also very much at the heart of this is us educating and training to get people to self-identify. So if you are vulnerable and need help, then when you do move, then you really do need to tell us. Because we won't be aware of that unless it comes from our annual inspections if we come along, and that obviously, that would be happening annually. So it's very much encouraging people to do that. So we have their
Does
details.
a resident get a copy of their PIB?
No, they don't get a copy of the PIB, but we will register.
Would that not help to give you a copy of the PIB and then with a contact box at the bottom that if you move or if your circumstances change, will let us know at this number and this email?
Well, yeah, I think if you're giving people copies of the PIB, we'll probably come back to the original point in terms of the data protection. But it's really if they notify us. I mean, in terms of them, I'm looking at people who acknowledge in terms of their notification.
Yes.
They should, in order to just get a copy of the PIB. But so just full disclosure, we had a fire safety for RBKC.
Might come and help you.
Yes,
That's
yeah,
all right.
absolutely. I'm sorry you don't have a little name.
I haven't got a name, so
So this is Katie, who's our new head of fire safety.
no one. So the conversation around PIBs is complicated, it's challenging. It's compounded by the fact that sometimes these disabilities are temporary. They're not all permanent. So the conversation around disclosure, with the best will in the world, is going to be very, very hard for us to know at every single point in time how able or not everybody in the building is. The permanent disabilities, we can account for that. There are consultations going on at the moment with the policymakers in the central government around how we share information with the fire brigade. PIBs in the context of a general needs block, it's never been done before, really, properly. So this is all new ground for us, so we're learning as we go along. But in terms of having a full picture of all of the limitations of everybody in the building at any given time is going to be very, very hard. We're probably not going to be able to account for everybody all the time. But it's the best endeavours approach. It's what we're trying to demonstrate. The previous framework relied entirely on self-referral. It didn't always work very well. So now we're trying to be a bit more proactive. We have our building safety managers in our in-scope buildings that will conduct audits of the information in the Pepper Tips box to make sure that that's as up to date as we can possibly get it. But there might still be some limitation in staff we can't easily overcome without assistance. But it's a one-down piece of work.
And it illustrates a wider problem, which is it would be a mistake, a terrible mistake, to introduce any one or even two or three of these measures and then to feel that you can just relax because you've got it covered. But even with all the measures that we are now putting in place, we are reducing rather than eliminating risk, and we're reducing it to the best of the ability that we have. We're always working to do that better. But one has to accept that there's always residual risk left for all the reasons we've been talking about and a whole lot more besides. And that it's a bit like those diagrams one saw during the pandemic where you have kind of where it showed how different layers of protection could add up to, as it were, a maximum level of discharge. It's a bit like that. If you have PIBs in place and you have PEEPs and you have all the other measures we're doing to do with the fabric of the buildings, each one of those measures incrementally reduces the risk of harm to humans, which is what this is really about. But no aggregation of those measures, and certainly no one or two measures in a row eliminate it completely. You have to live with the reality of the fact that that's the work we're doing.
100%. When we talk about fire safety in general terms, somebody like myself who's a practicing fire engineer, we don't look at the PEEPs in isolation. We look at the entire package of measures, and PEEPs is just one way that we reduce that risk to life. Lots of other things that we have to consider. We have to consider how we warn people of the presence of smoke and fire and heat. We have to consider how we get people out of buildings. It's one thing having a PEEP for somebody if they're in a building where we can't, for example, feasibly retrofit an evacuation lift or a firefighting lift. The PEEPs conversation almost becomes moot. We can't really do much more in terms of getting that person out of the building. So it is nuanced, it is complicated, and again, we are talking about something that we've never been asked to do before. So we're trying to unpick it. But with the best fire risk management system in the world, we still are going to have anomalies that we can't easily reconcile, because we are largely talking about retrofitting these measures into old buildings, and that limits what you can and can't do. But Dan's absolutely right. We have to look at this problem as a package. We can't just look at PEEPs. We can't just look at fire doors. We have to look at everything, because some things, introducing them, negatively impact others and vice versa. We need to make sure that that overall level of safety is maintained. So it's difficult. I can't pretend that it isn't, but it's difficult for everybody at the moment. Everybody's having the same challenge.
Councillor Lane.
Yes, thank you. So, similar topic, just in relation to number 005, the fourth paragraph, the approach in 2022 to write to all residents annually. Just a couple of questions on that. My first question is, in a lot of communal blocks, mail does get lost or go in the bin. Are we contacting via, say, text alerts or email? Are we doing all of those things as well?
We're looking to make more use of things like social media. In some of our blocks, not all yet, we've rolled out some digital notice boards where we can have some of these messages just on a loop, so that while people are waiting for the proverbial lift, they can get a safety message, i.e. perhaps it might be useful for you to go upstairs and test your fire alarm today. Those sorts of things we are looking at. We haven't rolled it out yet, but we do have the infrastructure to do it. We've got the team set up, we've got the support, and we're looking at innovative ways to get these messages across rather than just sending them via the mail, because we know that sometimes they don't get.
Can
I just add to that? I mean, Peter referred earlier to some of the work that Doug is leading across the council to join up different departments in this. And this is a good illustration potentially of the importance of that. So yes, this is one of the methods we use to identify new or changed vulnerabilities. But of course, because we're part of an organisation that also has an adult social care department, there are other ways that we can gather information about people's emerging vulnerabilities, which don't just rely on that annual letter writing. We can also, by working more cleverly with those other departments of the council and other bits of the wider public sector, we can be building our intelligence and about people we know who might have vulnerabilities. And of course, that will often then mean us going and checking with them what that means for them in a housing context. But we're not relying, or at least where this is operating in the way that we want it to in the kind of medium to long term future, we won't just be relying on that annual process of approaching residents directly. We'll be able to gather information from other places.
Thank you. And I did have another question as well. What's your approach to residents who don't have English as a first language or might struggle to read? I imagine there may be some of those people. How do you approach them?
Similar process. We are looking at making sure that all of our leaflets are delivered in a number of different languages. Equally, some of the messaging that we can put out on social media, we can quite easily and readily get auto-translated. So we are aware of the needs of the community and we are trying to service it. There are limitations to the number of languages that we can translate to in order to get the message across. But looking at the demographics of the particular borough, I think that's a piece of work that we can quite easily take forward.
And just one final question. I note that you're sharing information with the London Fire Brigade here. Does the information get shared with other blue light services like the police or paramedic services? Do the fire brigade share it with them? You could imagine scenarios where they would have to be involved also in evacuating someone.
If I answer that informally, I used to work for the fire brigade, full disclosure, I worked there for a number of years, so there are concordats that allow them to do some of that. How extensive that is in terms of peeps and vulnerabilities, I couldn't tell you. But our focus at the moment in terms of talking to the fire brigade is particularly in terms of resident safety. It might be a wider question that I can take to the next meeting that I attend to see if we can formalise some kind of protocol. But at the moment, I don't believe that that is BAU.
Thanks.
Councillor Simmons.
Thanks. Start with, I'd like to follow on from Councillor Gardner's question, sticking with peeps. If you have a person who can't self-evacuate, even with the challenges that are faced in doing this very new piece of work, it seems to me that it would make a lot of sense that at least that information could be provided to the fire brigade. So that if there are mitigation and retrofitting that can be done, at least the fire brigade will know who can't self-evacuate and who needs them to evacuate for them. And that, I think, from what Councillor Gardner was saying, I think it's an important point. If the information that Councillor has on vulnerability can, if it's a permanent disability, can that not travel? Is there a system in place for that to travel if the person then is in different accommodation? Or would that then have to just be renewed at the annual refreshment of the data?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Now, the process is as follows. Somebody's need is identified. Person-centred fire risk assessment is conducted. On the back of that person-centred risk assessment, the outcome of which will determine what goes into the peak, what additional protection or not they may need. In the event that they are unable to self-evacuate, that is currently shared with the fire brigade. They do receive that information. That detail is shared in the PIP. In terms of making sure that that information is shared more broadly, kind of speaks to a conversation I've had more recently about a process called mutual exchange, where somebody comes from another borough into our housing stock, and at that point there's a natural touch point to get some of this information that might be able to inform these person-centred fire risk assessments, but it's not currently happening. But there's a working group that's been put together. Some questions have been asked of our legal department. We don't know this yet, but I did that earlier this week. To find out what the mechanics of that are. Can we extract or tease that person-centred information out at that mutual exchange point without allowing somebody to go into the general population and almost disappear?
Yeah.
But it doesn't currently happen.
And also, this isn't just work of the State Fire Safety team. We have visiting officers, we have a neighbourhood team, and if somebody with those who actually refer people and refer information into this work if a person such as that who'd already been referred was to move, that information should actually move with them. We've got to make sure that that happens, but the indication so far is that we're actually getting information from other teams within housing management and elsewhere. So I would imagine that that's what will begin to happen more formally as we do this more and more. Great, thank you. And I did have another question, just looking on page 14 in 002, reporting of combustible facades. Now, as we know, the 18 metre criterion is put in place arbitrarily by the admission of the man who did it. So I'm just wondering, in terms of combustible facades less than 18 metres, do we have any reporting on that? And also, it says we have limited stock of the over 18 metres. I would be interested to know if you can point me to some information on the scale of that, what actually is the scale that we're looking at.
So as I understand it, we have 33 buildings in scope of the Building Safety Act, i.e. above
Yeah.
7 stories or 18 metres. We have just started to conduct fire risk assessments of those external walls. A consultant has been appointed and they've just started the first tranche of that particular work. We've just had the first FRAEW back for Trellick Tower. You'll be pleased to note that we don't need to conduct any remedial action there. We're now looking and prioritising the shelter blocks and the rest of the buildings in scope. That's ongoing. And we should get some reports back. I believe Lonsdale House has been surveyed. We're just waiting for the report back there. Tavistock House is about to be surveyed as well. So we're starting to build up a picture of those risks. The issue with the FRAEWs is when it comes to the remediation, we don't know what that's going to look like until we get the report. We're just going through the process of prioritising. So we're working through it on a risk-based approach. So below 18 metres, again, in the context of the enacted Building Safety Act, we have to start engaging with the regulator on our safety cases in April next year. So we are prioritising the in-scope buildings. Once we've concluded that piece of work, we will look at buildings below 18 to 11, because it's likely that sometime in the future they're going to come into scope of the Act as well. But given where we are, given the time constraints, we have to focus on the high rise and so-called high risk.
Thanks very much.
So I'll bring Councillor North in a minute, but my first question is actually a direct follow-on sentence, and it's on paragraph 2.3, and I'm wondering what timescale you're estimating for completion of that work assessing the 18-metre plus buildings. Because it's a bit of an open-ended thing in terms of what you're going to find, have you made any budgetary provisions for remediation? That's probably a question for the lead member.
So in terms of the time frame, we're working through it at pace, but you can imagine that it's quite detailed technical work, some of it involving detailed technical intrusive surveys that can be quite disruptive. So we're working towards a programme. We're hoping to have that completed by at least April next year when we have to start engaging. There are lots of people in the industry at the moment looking for the same services, so we're quite fortunate that we've actually got a consultant that's working quite closely with us and we have an established relationship with. So they understand our expectations, they understand the history and the legacy, and they understand the need to ensure that we get a very accurate picture of the actual risks associated with these external walls. And once we have that information, feed that directly into the fire risk assessments, and that will give us a much broader risk profile that we can use to take forward. So we're hoping to get it done by the middle of next year.
So by the end of the financial year?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. And the second part of the question for the member or
Please might be able to help with that, with the way that we kind of budget for
contingency.
Can I just say we've got a contingency to deal with fireworks, but also, as you know, we've got a capital programme, and so as much as possible of this work could be, we'd hope, incorporated into the capital programme as well. So it won't be standalone. It could be done with other works which need to be done to those particular buildings, subject to us getting the timing right. So it's a mixture of the capital programme, where we do have a line for fireworks. We have a contingency in the budget as well for fireworks, obviously subject to the results of the FRAEWs as well. So a number of pots. I couldn't, because we don't have the results, I couldn't tell you that we've got them all completely covered, but we have tried to make allowance in various pots of funding.
No, but presumably, if an FRAEW produces a need for work,
Yes.
that will immediately become quite
on the priority
a
basis.
So you're ready for that if it.
And I'm just trying to remember which building it was, but I mean, if there is something which is a priority, we'll take immediate action on, well, that will extend to also having waking watches. on the building as well while we're doing the work. I'm just trying to think of the
Oxford Gardens.
Oxford Gardens where we had that issue where we identified it as an issue.
Councillor North.
Yes, just a couple of brief ones. Just following on from Councillor Lane's question about languages, does that include Braille?
TBC, that would be
Thank you.
very likely.
And my other question is about page 16007. At the bottom there, we said that we are seeking to appoint a contract to carry out the annual back door entrance checks. Has that actually happened?
It's just about to be awarded. I believe our operations manager was speaking today with the successful tenderer. That will be mobilised before 23rd of January.
Because I noticed today. Thank you very much.
Just on the point about languages, and I think this goes both for the foreign languages and also the at risk of stating the absolutely obvious, the fact that someone needs something in those languages could be considered itself a vulnerability in the emergency. So it's a particular priority to make sure that that is not a reason that people include cracks. So
Thanks, that's reassuring.
it's an important issue.
Thanks very much. So just another one from me, paragraph 2.8 is a list of activities. How long will it take you to bring all the 38 buildings list into compliance? Or is that have to be incorporated in the actions that say will warrant?
So in terms of bringing the 38 in-scope buildings fully up to speed and compliant in terms of what the regulator will expect, this kind of speaks to the safety case. Now, we don't actually know what the regulator wants to see in the safety case yet. That hasn't been detailed. All we have at the moment is a best guess approach. The safety case is basically the golden thread. This golden thread in old money is Regulation 38, fire safety information. So we have a significant amount of that information. There may be a few gaps that we're trying to plug, but in the context of where we are versus some of our near neighbours, we're in a very good position, I think. When we engage with the regulator in April, we'll present the safety case and the safety case report with the safety case argument, and the regulator will assess it. There won't be any certificates issued because certification is expensive. They don't want to do that. They're going to assess the safety case and give us a grading. And based on that grading, we will either have to go away and do a bit more work to support the safety case, or we can hold our safety case as being a single point of truth. So it's a TBC at the moment. I can't give you a hard and fast answer on it because the regulator's not sharing any more detail. We won't know any more about that until we present our case to them.
Thanks, Any follow-ups from anything from members of the committee, Councillor Darling?
I've actually got a proper question. Could you just explain that golden thread so I make sure it's actually what I think it is?
Yes. So as I say, in old money, the golden thread is fire safety information, i.e. the information that the end user, client, responsible person or the accountable person today needs at the point of handover of the asset to enable them to manage it and maintain it effectively for its entire life cycle. Historically, that was handed over. O&M manuals, that kind of stuff, lots of microfiches, that kind of stuff. The golden thread is that information, but it has to be digital by default. So that it's maintained throughout the life cycle of the building. That golden thread feeds directly into the safety case, and the safety case is the information we need to share with the regulator to underpin the argument that we're making for safety in that building. So golden thread is just asset information, management information, maintenance information, O&M manuals, fire strategies, drawings, data sheets, all the things that go into a building to make it a building in the context of fire safety.
And then to what extent, how much of that goes in your PIB, so your premises information box?
How much of the golden thread goes in there? Not a lot.
Not a lot.
All we get, really, all we've been asked to do, and we're following national guidance now, in terms of the information that goes into the PIB, is just plain, simple line drawings, schematics, so that the firefighters can establish where some of these useful assets are, particularly the assets that they use to fight fire. So where are the fire doors in the building? Where are the lifts? Where are the risers, dry risers, wet risers, if they exist? That's the only information the fire brigade need when they pitch up to fight fire or to assist with evacuation. So it's very limited, but that information is underpinned in the safety case.
So the PIPs aren't even in there either. So how does a fire,
No, so the peeps are in the box.
Peeps are in the box?
Yeah.
Ah,
A peep does not form part of the golden thread in the context of how we manage the asset.
So what else is in the box? So it's golden thread.
Golden
sorry,
thread,
limited
floor
golden
plans, you might have fobs and keys to access risers. Stuff that goes into a premises information box, we have to understand, is for fire and rescue service use. And it's for fire and rescue service use in the context of an operation incident. Simple is better. The less information they have to deal with, the quicker they can affect their rescues or firefighting. So it's very limited information, and it's only information used to help them either fight fire or assist with evacuation. That's all.
And do you monitor that regularly, that it's not being tampered with? Or
It's a very secure box. It's on a particular key that you can't buy. It's a girder key, girder box. It's not like your old FD keys which you can buy on eBay. So it's very, very, very secure. So it's not likely to be tampered with by anybody other than us or the fire service, and we wouldn't tamper with it other than to audit it. And the fire and rescue service would only look at it when they come to do their familiarisation visits anyway. So there's a couple of layers of assurance. We conduct regular audits. The building safety managers of the in-scope buildings will also conduct audits. The fire brigade, when they come to do their 72D familiarisation visits, will also check to make sure that Mrs. Smith is still in flat 10. So there are some measures in place, but it needs to be finessed because, again, it's new for us, it's new for the fire brigade as well. We're just trying to iron it out.
I was just
Yeah,
asking about lifts.
Yes.
So 004, page 14. You changed from quarterly to monthly testing. Is that just being extra official, have there been failings, and if so, it's the percentage fee? And what are you doing about, for example, persistent problem lifts?
So what we have taken to testing is the access keys, the keys that firefighters use to take control of the lift. Now, they are prone to failure. And as I said, the facilities that are there for firefighting need to be available at all material times. We have to check them regularly to make sure that when they pitch up to use them, they're in service. Some of the lift keys are out in the public domain, so people do tamper with them. So it's just about gaining that additional assurance, really, nothing more than that. I'm not aware of any actual issues. Peter and the rest of the team.
They're part of controls that we have on more general compliance. It's not just about fire safety. We have a contractor that actually checks the lifts monthly, and we just tidied up to make sure that we exhibiting best practice.
So it's included as a good extra.
Yes.
Thanks, Matt. So are there any questions from the floor? I see you've got a couple of residents on fire safety. Anything? Thanks very much. Great. Well, thank you very much indeed for the paper. This is, for obvious reasons in this borough, one of the most important things we scrutinise, and we will want to have it back on next year. I think the table at which you're calling table 1, I think that's extremely helpful, and it would be, as we did last time, some of you who were on the committee last year will remember that we sort of table a second time with how you got on with the various actions. So in a few months' time, if we can have the same table back with how you got on with it, that would be extremely helpful when we do it in the next CAPS. So I guess it's probably summer or autumn 2023 as a committee. And in the meantime, I know we were hoping to do some visits as a committee. I don't know how we're getting on with that, Jackie, if you had any discussions with the chairman.
Been liaising with Mr. about it.
I've got an idea about booking, so for example, the fire doors are a key component of fire safety and something that the borough has devoted quite a lot of resource to. And I wondered if the committee would be interested in looking at an estate or area where they hadn't been actually changed yet, and one where they had been changed, and to see the issues that actually the new fire doors had helped to ameliorate. And so, for example, the Cremorne estate have had their fire doors replaced, and they're actually quite keen on showing them off because they think it's not only about fire safety, but it's about security, but also appearance.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought if we could talk to the team, the capital delivery team, about a site where they were just about to start doing the works, talk you through the choices, etc., and then perhaps go to Cremorne. And Mr. Shah, who's the chair of the Cremorne Residents Association, I've checked with him, and subject to it being at a time where he could spare the time, say Friday morning, if that was acceptable, he'd be very happy to host the committee at that time.
Thank you for starting to progress that, and I know Jackie can liaise with us about dates on that, because I think it would be worthwhile doing that. And I won't bang on about visits anymore because I think it. Thank you very much indeed to everybody for that, but we'll move on to item 86, and I'm sure we'll do a bit of shuffling at the table.
Thank you, Peter.
Some people staying, some people going.
Yeah.
Thanks. Right, so we're on repairs, and again.
Again, a short introduction, rather similar to the last paper. We gave a previous report on repairs back in 2020, and this is an update. And really summarising within the report, in 2018, we had a massive backlog of repairs. And we brought our repairs function in-house under 2P 2019. We'll be working on this backlog. The whole issue of repairs for us is something which has been shaped very much with working with residents and getting feedback from residents. And I think you can see the conclusion at the back as to where we are, and we continue, to work hard on this, in as much that we have independent surveys that are done following repairs, and the most important point of that is not just obviously the report from the resident themselves as to how well they think we've performed, but most importantly in terms of what we could do, we can do better. If you look at the overall satisfaction surveys, 21-22 we were 73%, and we had a target of 80, and we're just above that at 81%, but there's still more that we can do.
Thank you very much. Any additions from any officers before we go to questions? Good. So questions from the committee, Councillor Norton?
Just one question. Page 25, you referred to the complex case manager. Really, can you tell us a bit more information about that? A new appointment? If you can give us a bit more information on that.
Sorry, I'm Sharon Niggleton, so I'm the head of resident safety and repairs, so I look after the repairs team and the compliance team as well. There was a question you mentioned about lifts, and I'm not meant to be talking about lifts, but as well as the monthly checks, if there is an issue with a lift, we do inform the fire brigade so they're aware if the lift is out of service as well before they attend. So, I'll just get that across. So we have a complex case manager who works directly with me, so should there be a complaint, this person, along with an officer, will investigate the actual complaint. They'll speak with the resident, they'll find out what the problem is, they'll then liaise with the team, the repairs team, throughout the duration until the repair is actually completed. Each week we meet and we'll discuss the case, and each officer is there that's responsible in relation to the repair, etc. as well, until the repair is completed.
And this is a new appointment?
Yes.
Councillor Simmons?
I'm just looking at the performance measures on page 29, and the satisfaction figures. And I'm just wondering, would it be possible to get more information on this in terms of what proportion of residents are responding to this? Because I'm seeing these percentages and I'm not seeing what they're a percentage of.
Okay.
So maybe could I drop you an email?
Yes, I'm happy. But sadly, not as many people as we'd like to respond as well. We actually have people saying that they don't actually want to take part in the survey.
And there's been a lot of surveys, and I understand it's difficult to get people to respond often to these things. But it would be useful to see these numbers in some sort of context and see what's missing from the picture. That would be great.
Yes, could we have that as a written response to the whole committee?
Sure, I think
Please, I think it's a very good thing to ask.
be an idea to show the number of jobs as well, so the
Yeah.
number of jobs.
Yes, that would be really helpful. Thanks.
Anything else?
That's it for now, I think.
Okay,
Just
Councillor
to
Lane?
chip in on that,
Yeah.
actually, on terms of overall performance, I mean, we obviously get very detailed performance reports within housing, and that's something which I know is being encouraged elsewhere within the council with a view to publishing these. I think it's important to be quite transparent in terms of what our overall performance is as a council in terms of our will wish to be one of the best candidates.
Councillor Ray.
Just sticking with that same table Councillor Simmons referenced, in relation to the repairs completed in one visit, just a couple of questions on that. First of all, they're all in the 90s, which sounds good, but how does that compare to, say, other boroughs or 5 years ago? Are there other boroughs that are getting 98, 99%, or actually is this figure really good?
This figure is really good
Okay.
because a number of repairs we are able to complete on one visit because they're quick. But there are others, if I'm being honest, that we struggle with. If it requires more than one visit, you'll see that we're not very good at that. But first visit we are very good.
And then just a follow-on question, if the figures are ranging throughout the year between 90 and I think 94%, why is the target 80%? Shouldn't we be trying to target somewhere between 90 and 95% if that's what we're getting every month?
Well, I did actually speak to Peter about this last week, that we would look at some of the targets because obviously we are surpassing a number of them. It would be good to push ourselves a bit further as well.
I was going to say, we started from a very, very low level. So 80% was a lot higher than where we started. But yeah, no, absolutely right. We should always keep pushing on it, absolutely.
And that is a very good point. You don't want to target too high because otherwise then you'll be knocking into the future. Thanks very much.
But you need to be ambitious. Councillor Galvin.
Again, on the same table, the emergency repairs completed within 24 hours. I was intrigued. I want to know what is the difference between quarter one, where you have 355, and then suddenly in quarter two you get to 514, and then July your figures for fixing really fall to 74.29%. You're going, what happened in July? And why the quarter difference?
So we've had some new staff in our housing response team who have, on occasion, or quite a number of occasions, raised the jobs in the wrong priorities, which has caused us some problems as well. So they're raising them as an emergency, and this could be because they feel pressurised and are not following the protocol for an emergency job, and it should be raised as an urgent or a routine. So hopefully that answers your question. So training because we have a performance meeting each month and we look at the figures each week as well. Some additional training has happened with the team. We met last week, and this only goes up to September, and we have seen for October. I'm more than happy to share October and November where we've seen this.
But you're this is so you're saying it shouldn't have been tasked as something that should have been fixed within 24 hours, but is that because you're saying the job actually needed longer? Sorry, you either failed because it wasn't fixed within 24 hours, it doesn't get seen to, or it actually took more than one visit. So what's
So it's a combination of things. So they've taken more than one visit because they are not emergency jobs. They should be raised as routines. So they should have been raised as a 5-day attendance priority instead of 24. But due to, as I said, new members of the team and also members feeling pressurised by residents that they're speaking to raise these jobs as well, that's why that's increased. What we've also found as well is a high level of no accesses. So we'll do this, we'll raise a 24-hour, and we'll find that the resident's actually not at home. So it's just wasting that resource. They could be doing another job. So we have text notification. We send a text message the night before and the morning of. We've had complaints recently of we're bombarding with text messages. So it's just a reminder, just as it, with Amazon, the delivery is coming. We're just trying to remind people because things happen in people's lives and they may forget or.
So on a 24-hour call out, do you give, it's the perennial British Gas question. Do you give them a sort of 8 to 1? Do they have to be in for 5 hours?
They do. So we're saying we'll attend within 24 hours. So we give no fixed time.
Yeah. And
So
is that realistic to expect people to
so
stay in
this is
24
why
hours?
it would be easier to have the job raised as routine, so you know exactly when they're coming.
So for sorry.
So it's a
for a
5-day
5-day
attendance.
So you give people allocated time slots.
Yes.
In a
So it'd be AM, PM, school run, AM, PM as
Why
well.
can't you give somebody AM or PM at least for 24 hours?
So it's an emergency. So the whole point of emergency is really urgent. So we've got urgent and emergency as well. So no heating, no hot water, and there's vulnerability. So we have, if I'm just going, some people abusing certain, they'll call at the weekend because they'll think they get their service at the weekend. They'll attend within 4 hours instead of going through the process, and it's just putting a strain on the resource at the moment. So we're looking at this and trying to work with residents. I think it would, as you said, be better to know when we are coming, that somebody is coming at AM or PM, than not knowing when someone's going to attend at all. And we have actually discussed looking at the whole, should we have a 24-hour priority, is that correct? Should we not have emergencies and urgents, which are 5-day attendance? And it's a discussion that we've got finished. So your thoughts on that would be quite interesting.
Certainly, I find it very hard personally to ever stay in the whole day and leaving. I mean, even if you've just got something, you've got a kid or a dog, it's just physically not possible. So I always, will try and pick a smallest slot available.
Yeah, well, we're here to ask the question, so
Yeah, no,
let's
well,
leave it hanging
yeah.
at the moment. So,
Can I just have one
yes,
other
one
question?
more.
Page 30, I think your figure is wrong, isn't it? Because the text doesn't match. So you say you only had 10,830 calls last year, and yet you get 44,000 this year. And yet you say it's a decrease on last year. So I was genuinely going to ask why it increased so significantly. So if you look at the first column, 21-22, 10,830 number of incoming calls, and this year to date, 44,413.
I think that it's
I think
the
it was-
column's not wide enough. I think it's
You missed a zero.
8,300 and
Yes,
something.
I think you're missing a zero.
I think it's
That does,
zero.
yeah. Only because the text underneath.
I'm sorry, my printing
Yeah,
on
the
mine's
zero.
dropped down. That's there.
That's 108,000.
108.
Yeah.
Zero
Yeah.
seems to have dropped down below
It's
the one.
sorry, it's
Oh,
the column's not wide enough.
That's fine.
Yeah.
In which case I don't have any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Rossi, actually, she observed that the tables are too small. I think we just proved that. But she also commended you for bringing things in-house, and so that's a good thing, particularly good to have a Saturday morning appointment. My question actually relates back to the something we did in the Overview and Scrutiny Committee within 4 weeks ago, which was the annual complaints report. And I know Dan was certainly there. And housing management showed an 80% increase in complaints year on year. And of course, not all of those were in respect to repairs. And there's a wide spectrum of things included in that. But one of the comments in the report explaining housing management was, quote, lack of proactive communication at various stages of the repairs process. So perhaps you could talk to us about that. Is a kind of a mismatch with the quite rosy picture you've got in the table on this report. But I can see why they would sort of exist with each other. But you can say a bit more about those two things, please.
So the first thing I'll say just to introduce is I think I'm right in saying that complaints report related to the year 21-22, whereas the data we're showing you here is slightly up to date. And what we do with respect to complaints is that year, 20, not to dismiss the data, which, as you say, speak for themselves, but that year was a particularly tough year in terms of complaints. We've already seen that drop in the year that we're now currently in. So that to the extent that there is a mismatch between the story that complaints report told and the story you're seeing here, that's part of it because they're talking about two slightly different periods in time. I think we attribute some of that 21-22 picture to the particular impacts of COVID and the pandemic and the kind of the different, I think the kind of the different relationship that people had with their homes and with their landlord during those periods of the pandemic than perhaps has been the case since. Although I've also been really clear when talking to Doug and others about it that as it were, because it's very comforting to kind of to outsource all responsibility for that kind of spike to some external factor. Clearly, we need to be a bit more curious about what the factors are that might be driving that and not external. I don't know if each of you want to say more about your reading of those changes over time.
I think it would be, as Dan has said, they were particularly challenging times, and for example, lots of landlords weren't doing any repairs at all, they shut up shop. We actually carried on with mixed success in some areas, but we had people coming in, we had operatives going out with the PP, etc. So it was extremely challenging. But I think it would be fair to say that one of our biggest challenges and what we're working with people on as a team is about communication and keeping people informed of what's going on. So we get something to sort out and we scurry around like good uns trying to sort it out, and we don't always keep residents informed of what we're doing, so they don't necessarily know we're actually trying to resolve it. And would you say that's a fair? Yeah. And I think that's one of our weaknesses, which we are trying to address through training, customer care training. Have you told the resident we're doing all these wonderful things? Those sorts of sides that as a management team we're talking to people about. So I think that's a fair reflection of where that sort of comment would come from.
Do your operatives have checklists which include the communication tick that they need to get for a job? Is that something that they,
What do you mean?
with a checklist of things that if a
PDA.
request comes in for a repair that the operative has to do X, Y and Z, and communication with the resident is one of them to explain what's going on. Is it?
Yes, so when an operative arrives at a property, they explain why they are there, what work they'll be carrying out, how long they intend on being on the property. We're finding the engagement of the resident is helping, and also highlighting the operative to any other possible problems that are within the property as well. And what we have been working to try and get them to do is, whilst they're there, if they do have the time, to carry out the other repair as well, instead of sending somebody back. There's nothing worse than somebody having to return to do a job that could have been done whilst the person was there.
Thank you. Any follow-ups from committee members? Councillor Simmons?
Yeah, I've forgotten a couple actually, sorry. I was just wondering, going back to what we were talking about, the Doug's vulnerability agenda and the sharing of the information. Do you have something in place so that when someone asks for a repair, if it's somebody with a vulnerability perhaps that needs a relative to attend at the same time or needs notice for the appointment, do you have something in place to match that up so that you know the needs of the resident?
So that's on our BIREP list. So we had a list of things, so whether a social worker or family member needs to be there whilst we're carrying out the appointment. So yes.
Because I guess that makes it difficult in the case of a 24-hour repair.
Yes, it would. So on those occasions and the 2 hours as well, we
Yeah.
wouldn't just attend, we have to attend.
Yeah,
We're not going to wait and leave
yeah,
the situation.
of course.
There are occasions in the evening where a caretaker, depending on what comes up, a caretaker or another member of the team will attend as well. So there may be a slight delay in that attendance, but it's still attended to.
So I'm thinking, I'm thinking about what you say about the resource, because obviously resources are at a premium currently. And I'd be interested to know if you're having any piece of work going on looking at how to, with the non-attendance or non-access, I think you said,
Yes.
how to minimise that or reduce it at least a little bit.
So it has reduced and it spiked quite recently. And actually we met and discussed this last week. So it was at a level which was totally unacceptable. Needed to understand why.
Yeah.
And it seemed as though, so we have a system where you can turn on text alerts or you can turn them off, and residents actually ask for the message to be off as well, so they don't actually want a text alert, which is a bit of a problem. If I'm being entirely honest, somebody had switched it off completely, we switched it back on, and the no access level just dropped off. I have an issue this month with a particular trade, and again, asked a question, looked into it, so I haven't had the answer yet, but it's very unusual for this particular trade to have the number of no accesses. So we're having problems with plumbing. That's absolutely fine now. Now we seem to have an issue with electrical jobs, which I've asked to be delved into. So
Great,
we are
thanks.
looking at these
And
things.
I just have one more point to raise, which is the question of mould. Because obviously that's currently an issue. And I was just wondering to what extent is it an issue in our properties and how are we dealing with that? So it's a difficult one, I know.
It is, and something that we discussed today, actually, and most weeks. So we have a policy which we've revised. We've chosen for the surveyor to be the first point of contact to go into the property and to make an assessment as to what they believe is the correct equipment or works that need to be carried out. Where we need to get better is the education as well of explaining to the resident why certain measures have been put in place. We've found on occasion that we've put systems in and people are turning them off because they don't want to, it's an additional cost of electricity. So they're turning their fans off and other bits and pieces, which then brings the problem back. We've got some properties where we've got repeat mould issues. Some is due to overcrowding as well. So we've got a combination. Do I know how many we have? I'm not going to go and say yes, I do, because I don't.
Yeah.
But it's something that the
big
team are.
scale problem or?
Well, I mean, we take it very seriously. If there is a complaint of mould, etc., we do attend. So it might be an operative, or would have been an operative in the first instance, but we've now decided that it will be a surveyor instead that attends.
Yeah, and that's. You won't be surprised to hear I've been asking some questions about this, and actually so was Maxine, the chief executive, over the last week or so. And this thing about a surveyor being involved early on is really important, because I think historically in the housing sector, I don't include housing colleagues generally, but historically in the housing sector, there has been a slight tendency to to exhaust all the questions about lifestyle before you get to a question about whether there might be actually something wrong with the building, that where there's water ingress that's causing. And the kind of the principle that underpins involving a surveyor early is saying, let's go straight away to the question about whether there's something wrong with the building, and think about, take put our landlord responsibility at the front rather than at the back of the process, if that makes sense. And in looking at some of the data for ourselves and kind of benchmarking against the rest of the sector, I think one of the things that we need to particularly focus on is the number of. I mean, there'll be a statistic about the overall number of cases, but the ones which are a real concern, things about the experience of horrible incident in Rochdale, is the cases where of kind of repeat reports, where for some reason or other the problem is not getting solved, and it's those cases I think that we need to be particularly paying attention to, and particularly challenging ourselves on to what extent we are understanding and trying actively to understand, particularly the kind of the role that the building itself might be playing. The Housing Ombudsman issued some guidance, I think, quite recently, last year or relatively recently, which was very strict on this point about how it should be seen primarily as a landlord responsibility rather than to do with lifestyle and tenant issues. And that laid down a very clear red line for the sector, for us as landlords. But that was the approach we need to take, and that's kind of what's underpins the exposure result.
Just to sort of add into that as well is that there's a whole issue with this within our housing matters with regard to mould prevention. As I say, that's not wanting to blame on residents at all, but there are basic things that people really need to do in order to minimise it, and it's something which, as I say, is very much about in terms of education. Some of the cases that really worry is where you have people with vulnerability who will not allow you to get access to deal with mould as well, and then it could become quite extreme. And we've got a couple of those going through at the moment. Which is a position where the council finds itself where you're almost going to have to start taking proceedings in order to get access to deal with an issue which is really quite an extreme issue as well. It's a real problem, but fabric first, education is the two keys to stopping it.
I think if there's an issue with, say, a dehumidifier is required, and we're in a cost of living crisis, then that's going to present another obstacle to reducing the problem as it's ongoing.
We found there's a fund.
Sorry?
Last week we found there's a fund that we can
Okay.
draw from to give to people to put the D homes on.
Great.
Something that none of us knew about until
Yeah.
last week. Being honest with you.
Fantastic. That's great.
And of course, the other challenge there with the social housing is that we've got here the landlords of about a quarter of the social housing tenants, and we've got all those housing associations out there.
Well,
For example, the one in Rochdale, but
I'm,
we know we've got problems with some of them, so.
I'm just today looking at whether we can kind of move this up the priority list for discussion at the RP forum that we convene, for exactly that reason. I mean, I'd like to think that that every social landlord in the borough is sitting having a version of this conversation right now, if you see what I mean, given what's happened and given the profile of the story. But we don't, and as we talked about at the last one of these meetings, we don't have any kind of regulatory stick we can hold in the sector, but nevertheless we do have a kind of a local leadership role, a convening role to kind of give ourselves what assurance we can this is being taken seriously by local landlords. And of course, the other angle of it is that it's an issue for private landlords too. So our environmental health team, regulatory responsibility of the private rented sector. The Secretary of State, Michael Gove, wrote to. We got two letters from him over the weekend. One was to us as landlord, and the other to us as regulator in the private sector, both saying you need to take this very seriously with both of those hats, if you see what I mean. And we're just now kind of circling to think about what that means.
And the other thing, just to add, which is quite interesting, is part of our capital refurbishment programme. One of the things that we found is that by replacing the dreadful rattling, leaking windows that we've got, very good quality double, triple glazed windows, it does exacerbate issues in terms of ventilation. So we are building into that programme ventilation of windows, new windows, you've got ventilation strips as well, in order to ensure, because that's really the big issue. It's not just a question of but it's air circulation is the most important thing to get people to do.
Thank you very much. Let me just ask if there's questions from the floor from our residents.
In terms of the fabric of the building, there's a lot of elderly people living in fairly confined spaces, studio flats,
Which property are you in, sir?
Whitchurch House.
Whitchurch House.
They don't conform to any sort of anthropomorphic data at all. They were perhaps less studio flats, more one-bedroom flats, decent proportions.
Have you got any experience of the repairs service you want to bring to the committee, either of you? Either of you used
The
it?
repair seems okay. I haven't had many repairs. Repairs that don't seem to happen, but they're sort of fairly trivial, not really important ones. But apparently people are getting bigger. So for future-proof, when you guys all get old,
Ian, anything you want
just
to add?
after yourselves, you know.
Anything you want to add to Pond's House experience of repairs service?
No, I really do try and do my repairs myself. So I tend to do that. But when I have used repair service, I found them quite good recently. But they weren't in the past.
So I think that's anecdotally vindicating the story we've heard from the council. So thank you.
Ian's one of my residents in my ward.
Let's say that's my personal experience. A lot of people are unlikely to agree with me.
Okay. Well, we'll park that one then, and no doubt we'll return to the subject of
We
repairs.
try to complement
And indeed the
anecdotally.
this whole maintenance and upgrade programme and good further stage in the committee. But thank you very much. Again,
Thank you.
Thanks, Alan.
for tonight, and then we need to swap over at the front bench for item 7. Right, so item A7, Councillor McVeigh, do you wish to introduce paper?
Yes, well, first of all, I'd actually really like to thank the committee for asking for this, because I think it's a fantastic report. I think it's also cut across many other departments. And I think this is what you often don't appreciate in the voluntary community sector, that it doesn't just come under communities, it comes under the adult social care, the family services, and also property and housing. So I found it actually very enlightening myself. So I look forward to answering any questions, and Moira will be much more up to date with the detail, I'm sure, as well.
Maura, is there anything you wish to add by way of introduction to that?
Yes, I would like to add that in 2021-22 we worked with about 190 business organisations through grants, contracts and support around property, and it just goes to show that there is such a rich sector in the borough supporting us and working with us to deliver against our council priorities and the outcomes that we want to achieve for residents. We are looking at our relationship with the sector. We're about to embark on a BCS transformation programme, which will put us on a more mature, equal footing as equal partners, but also looking at how we can work more efficiently together and how we can ensure that residents, when they access services, whether that is the BCS or with the council, they access the same high quality services. So we're going to be working a lot more closely with the sector in the coming months. But as part of that, there could be efficiencies realised. And that's not the reason why we're going to be transforming our relationship, but that could be one of the outcomes. So we think that it's really important that we recognise and acknowledge and promote their role in the borough, and acknowledge also that sometimes the sector is in a better position to deliver on particular aspects, and the council can be, I wouldn't say a junior partner, but we can allow the sector to lead in some circumstances, and that's part of what this transformation is about. And we are currently collecting the information for 2022-23, and we're happy to come back to scrutiny to update you once we have that information.
Thank you very much. So questions from the committee. I'll start with Councillor Simmons.
Thank you very much. I was just wondering, looking at the council's relationship with the voluntary sector as a whole, you mentioned grants, contracts and support around property. And I was just wondering whether it would be possible to see a list of the organisations, I think you said it's 190, sorry, but it would be really helpful to see a list of those and to see each one what kind of support is being in place.
Yeah, we could do that.
And I was going to ask something else, so it slipped my mind.
Well, while Councillor Simmons is thinking for mine, I'll just ask a follow-up on that, because I think the table at Annex A is extremely useful for the voluntary sector support fund, and we're very grateful for the chance to look at it. But that is only 10% of the amount. And a lot of this is done by the other departments, and particularly in this committee, because we're the housing and community select committee, I think we would like to see paragraph 3.4, which is the housing element, be broken out in the same level of detail as we've got for Annex A, please. And I know that's not your personal responsibility, but
We have the information.
we'd like the information to get to us somehow, please. I don't think as a committee we can ask the same level of information on about social care and health and communities and children's, because it's not our committee to responsibility to scrutinise it, but those committees might be interested. But I don't think we can answer that here.
But to make a very valid point of how interconnected they all are. So you mentioned the VSSF fund, Voluntary Sector Support Fund, which comes directly out of communities, and that is discretionary. And because we are allowed to fund, according to the applications, we can actually fund some of the core costs. So keeping the lights on, staff, which a lot of adult social care and families, they can't do because they're commission services. They have to often be linked to a specific outcome, specific project, programme. So that's why they're so interconnected, and we can't kind of take funding away from one of these without impacting on one of our commission services. So it's great to see it all in one place like this. But yes, noted more about that.
And compare also the difference between commission services and supported services.
Yeah.
That would be really great, and to see them by name, and to sort of see them.
Are you ready with your next
No,
question?
no,
Okay, we'll move on, and if you think of it, you can come back. Councillor Lane.
Thanks. Just a couple of questions. My first one is, are all the voluntary organisations mentioned in here registered charities, and are they regulated by the Charity Commission, or are there some voluntary organisations that are not registered charities?
They're all registered charities. If we work with them, they're all registered charities. Before we engage with any BCS organisation, we do our due diligence to make sure that they are come under the Charity Commission. So we don't work with any that aren't constituted as charities.
Apart from the Greenfield Project funds.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks.
So there's lots of small organisations there, and quite a few of them are community interests, CSCs.
So in terms of the BCS spend, the 22.3 million spent across the council and the commission services, they are all charities or community interest companies as well.
Perfect. And my next question is, do all of the voluntary organisations, I think actually in the first table, do they all have individual contracts with the council, and are those contracts able to be put into the public domain, or is it not something that can be shared with the public?
They do all have individual agreements with the council. I'm not sure about whether we can share them with the public. I can check on that and get back to you.
And linked to that, do you ever, or are you aware of any representations from any residents or members of the public, either positive or negative, about any funding that's been given to any of these VOs, or do you not really ever get any feedback?
And we generally don't get feedback on, I'm thinking about the voluntary support, sector support fund rather than the commissioning and other departments. We generally don't get feedback on that. What we sometimes get feedback on isn't so much funding, possibly the performance of one of the organisations, and that is part of our performance framework. So we do check that, and we do include feedback from residents on the performance of organisations as part of that. But also we've started.
So these are the ones. So as Maura said, we want performance and services, and this is the new system called the VSSF fund. And obviously adults and children have their own monitoring system, but because it's very onerous on a small organisation, small charity, to fill in lots of different monitoring forms. So we're trying as a council to be a little bit more joined up about trying to at least have a similar format that they can all fill in. Obviously they'll be looking at different things. And one of the things in the report that just want to draw your attention to is that we're trying to, on the back of it, we talk about different types of funding that organisations can apply to, and we're doing masterclasses for that. So we're trying to help them stand on their 2 feet as well, not just always look to the council and not just always look at just one other big funder. You know, the funding environment changes so quickly.
Well, that was linked to my next question really, is, you know, what encouragement or support do you give to any of these VOs to also raise money from other sources? So I don't know, perhaps supporting them in hiring a consultant who can reach out to, you know, private sector and raise money from there. Do you give any support or advice to enable them to raise money from alternative sources, not just the council?
We do. We organise masterclasses specifically for the ones that we fund, and we have contracts with KCSE to provide the support to the whole of the sector rather than just those that we fund. So there is support available for them to consider other options and how they might raise more funding.
Okay, and just one final question. Paragraph 1.2, you say voluntary sector's primary purpose to create, maintain, or expand positive social impact. Can I just check, by positive social impact, do you mean impact that would be universally viewed as positive in a democratic society, regardless of anyone's political viewpoint? Is that essentially what you would, is that how you define it? Because positive can mean different things to different people, can't it?
It is supposed to be a neutral positivity rather than political. So it's about improving communities, thriving communities, better outcomes for residents, that kind of positive impact.
Perfect. Those are my questions.
Thanks very much. I'm going to ask Councillor Ross's questions, which will explain why I'm sitting here looking very good on my phone, but actually her questions are here. So paragraph 3.5, and she's going into some detail here on adult social care and health. She's wondering how much is the NHS also spending on substance misuse, drug and alcohol support, housing, homelessness support, mental health, older people, care support, etc. in this borough. So how much are we duplicating or how much are we doing in addition to the
Actually, I don't know, I have to get that information and bring it back. I don't have that information, but we do work closely with NHS and public health to try and remove some of that duplication. And again, that's going to be part of the work we're doing around the VCS transformation work with colleagues in adults and children to make sure that that duplication is minimised.
Okay, thank you very much. So we then, her second question is on paragraph 4.6, which is about the additional funding, which I think we've got in there. And she's asking a new iteration or extension of the voluntary sex support fund from April next year won't have that additional funding available. The programme will return, she assumes, to the operating budget available through the general fund contribution. Can you expand on what that means? Is that a cut in those terms, or is there money from somewhere else?
You can go ahead. It's pretty much what she says is right.
Yes.
So it is a real terms cut.
Oh, I see. In terms of the
Funding that's available.
In terms of the total amount of funding that's available, but as we mentioned in the report, we are going to be extending the grants of some of the recipients, and for those that we're extending their grants, there's not going to be a cut. The cut comes from our performance management and analysis to find out and understand which organisations are underperforming at the moment, which organisations aren't delivering necessarily to residents in the borough, and that's where the saving is going to come from, rather than cutting the funding of those that are performing well.
Okay, so let me ask a supplementary on that, and I think it's paragraph 5.3 where you talk about that. I mean, how rigorous is that process? How many grantees? How are the grantees doing? How many will you stop funding to or reduce funding to already? Because of underperformance?
They are generally doing very well. There is only one organisation that we have ended funding to, in that they have come out of the VSSF funding regime, but we're still providing some support. We're providing core funding so that for them to continue and support their, to continue to employ their chief executive, so that they can still build their organisation. So it's not a complete cut-off. But there's just one at the moment, and going forward, we are looking at possibly another one. So it's not a lot of organisations that are underperforming. We do provide ongoing relationships with them. So there's monitoring visits. We have ongoing conversations. So it's not just a transactional relationship. It's actually a relationship where we're trying to support them to deliver the outcomes that we funded them to.
The majority of them are delivering, and how confident are you that you will make savings that you need?
So this is what's been going round and round the department for a long time. We've been discussing this, and the performance management framework to actually achieve cost savings is not perfect, because as soon as you start performance, you start kind of helping someone who's in trouble, and you say, well, why aren't you meeting your targets? Hopefully, with the support, they get better, they meet their targets, which is what you want, because you want the organisation to be viable and to help the residents it's serving. So if though they are genuinely not serving residents and they cannot serve them for whatever reason, then yes, we really do remove the funding. So we're looking at how we do this in the future. We're probably going to be doing aspects of performance management. We're looking also at an analysis of whether what we are funding links up with our council plan and links up with our priorities. So as you know, there's a whole new council plan refresh coming, refresh consultation, everything happening at the moment and going into the new year. So that might be a bit more of the focus of if we are having to be very tight with our budget.
So the committee will indulge me with another supplementary, because I know the other two members will be anxious to get in. Paragraph 3.3 breaks down the VCS expenditure by council plan priority. You can top that up to £20.6 million out of the £22.3 million. So that suggests to me that £1.8 million is not being spent towards a council plan priority. How's that justifiable?
So it's that 1.8 is actually rent subsidies. and there are rent subsidies with no conditions on the lease, so we couldn't match it to one of the council priorities. So that's why it's not included within the actual breakdown of VCS expenditure by council plan priority.
So this will be rent subsidies,
Yes.
it will probably come across in the detail of the housing,
Yeah.
and that's the one we're missing. So
Yes.
the detail that you do see is written on. So okay, that would be very.
And the housing are doing a very interesting whole piece about their and linking their rents instead of in the past just have giving peppercorn rent to linking it to social investment rents, which I think is really exciting. So
I think we do see a paper on that from them in the Overland Screening Committee rather than, if I remember rightly, it's overseas.
So
I think that's coming to the Overland Screening Committee rather than
Yes.
here. Good, okay.
So I just want to specify that it's 1.6 million is rent subsidies and then another 680,000 is submarket property leases.
So similar
And 600 of that is on one property, isn't it?
422.
One submarket under 3.6, environmental communities, we have one submarket property lease to the value of 600,000. So that was, if there are two such properties, the second property must be to the value of 88.
It's a good quick piece of maths. I think we need to see the detail from the executive on that. See some more detail, but okay, I think my supplementary was answered, and Councillor Gardner, your turn to ask some questions.
I mentioned, I think before you arrived, that I'm a trustee of Clement James. So actually, I'm aware from previous experience, their view, but I went back to them today and I said, tell me about how you view the monitoring process. And essentially, they said it's very time-consuming. They said it was confusing, evaluation and monitoring process asks for you for reporting on the whole centre, rather than what is specifically being funded. For other organisations which focus on maybe one project, that's fine. Somebody like Clement James has got different strands, that's another extra work. They said the gaps between reporting periods are very close. They said it feels like you don't get a break from reporting, but there isn't much change between reporting periods. So a fourth issue was demographic data, which actually takes the most amount of time for them to come through. And they said, could this be something that they would report on annually rather than every 3 months? So for me, that's just one charity organisation. And frankly, whilst I don't want to demean the purpose of funding, a body like Clement James does get funding from different bodies, different charities, different elements within the council. Actually, if you start repeating that process across, you land up actually taking away from delivering your services because it's all spent on admin, filling in processes. And I gather, I really appreciate it's not your department, but the GLA thing, the review books.
Yeah.
So if you are doing a review, could you please look at actually peeling back some of the layers, and I'd be happy to talk to you about their experience and what could change. And it may be that actually for good performing charities, you have a lesser regime, or as it goes on, you say, okay, this year we're going light touch, next year we'll do deep dive.
It's like what I touched on earlier about having the different pots of money. So, for example, the voluntary sector support fund, which is this relatively simple 2-page thing, is on here. Let's see what Clement James has from that. Amount. But then they also do adult learning, so that will come from kind of the business team, and then they'll have something else from the children's team for their crash, or they tend to do slightly older children. They'll do that into university, after schools, yeah. And so they will all have their different monitoring forms, and that pot of money, public money, will they'll be saying, you need to know that. But we can definitely, we have started the process a bit more joined up, and we have got commissioners around the table from all the different groups. Because I completely agree. I mean, you know, that they are really good at delivering the services. They're not form fillers.
Yeah.
But it, you know, again, it's public money, so there will have to be that, but it needs to be more.
Yeah.
I think everybody will recognise there has to be a performance monitoring. You have to check that they're on board, but there's how many layers. If I could just ask a couple of other questions. So I noticed Nucleus Resource Centre receives £300,000. So I suppose there's no citizens advice group, does that not come from you?
It's a separate contract, so it's not.
From this department or?
No, it is from this department. So it's part of, it was part of the SSF as a grant, but it was converted to a contract, so it's included within the spend, but it's not listed under the grant, but it's not a grant anymore.
I think I'm confused.
Okay,
So which paragraph in this report is it covered under?
It would be covered under environmental communities, advice services.
So we have pretty much kind of
That's
4
3.6.
advice services in the Borough Fund. CAB is one of them. Nucleus, Wilding Neighbourhood and Centre and North Cam Law for the other.
So table 6 under paragraph 3.6, advice services.
So page, what
It's
page?
page 34.
Thank you. So it comes under the number of BCSA arrangements. So I suppose it begs the question then, why is nucleus not running the same form as everybody else?
It's not just Nucleus, we have 4 other advice organisations that we work with, and the other 4 all have grants rather than contracts. It was the value of the funding to CAB that lent it to becoming a contract rather than a grant.
It says it vacant. But it's a very good question, Councillor Gardner, and we are reviewing the kind of advice aspect of the voluntary sector.
Yeah. So we will be retendering next year, and we've extended the CAB contract for a year. It was supposed to end September, and we extended it for a year. So we're going to start actually the start of next year reviewing our IAG services and start the tendering process in March.
So the contract will expire in September?
Yes. So we should have a new contract in place in September.
And then can I understand what's the difference, for example, on page 39, between people accessing services and participants? So in your 2 charts at the top, people accessing services and participants.
I only assume it means participants will also be volunteers. You could check that. Find out.
And I think my last question is very much based on...
Sorry, it might also be to do with they're not residents of the borough as well. So we do have some people that with the access services out of borough, or they're doing a very big event, or it could be a less.
Can I pick up on that? Because looking at that table, which Councillor Garden has very helpfully drawn our attention to, I reckon between 28.5% and 32.5% of people accessing the services are not residents of the borough. How is that justifiable? Is there any way of reclaiming costs?
Well, sorry, we're going to find out if it is participants, if it is to do with the borough. We'll find that. We'll get back to you about that. Because for some of them, in fact, on the voluntary sector support funds, we have very granular detail on whether they are residents in the borough or not, and that's going to be part of our criteria as to whether we carry out funding or not. And if they're mainly coming in from Westminster or Brent or Hammersmith and Fulham, we're going to say, well, those councils can pick up some of the costs. Sorry.
So that table strikes me needs a lot more detail behind it to understand where those that between a quarter and a third of the people are coming from and why we spend money. I mean, I'm sure people are benefiting from it, but that's our tax, that's our residents' taxes.
Not just add
And
another
that's, yes,
point to
please
that.
do, and then we'll bring Councillor Garson back in.
Sorry, it's very quickly. I'm aware of other boroughs who fund, I'm going to say, arts and cultural activities, which anyone can go to. So they would have a high number of people not from the borough, hopefully, attending, and that would be bringing people into the borough, where they might also be supporting local businesses and so forth. So depending on what the service is, it's not necessarily a bad thing, perhaps in terms of children's services and things, maybe it's not so good.
Yeah. But for cultural events,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, I think you have to look at the
Nuance,
second,
isn't it?
second and third order consequences and actually look at that in the business
Yeah.
case for it overall.
Noted that.
Okay, Councillor Gardner.
Yeah, I think actually they've just taken the exact comment I was going to make, which is particularly for borough, for charities up in the north of the borough, they will get a lot more from just across the border because they're only the streets away. So it has to be, it is that balancing act. And I know in past years there was always that question. For example, I used to serve on the COB. It was, what are we doing in Woolwich Scrubs prison? That was not, or one would hope it wasn't, lots of our residents, but at the same time, when they go, you have to justify your money. So I think it's a real balancing act, and I think we would welcome to see it.
Yeah.
But and also with any funding cuts or changes that you are going to do, wearing a charity hat, you really do need to ease people into this, tell people, because you can't suddenly just cut off a funding stream or cut off a third of the funding stream in this current climate, because people, we all know the cost of utilities are higher, but as a result, the need is as strong. And you can't just pick up the phone and bill out the app straight away. So there needs to be communication.
Just to that point, just two points. Some of the, obviously the services are by borough, so there might not be, that might be some of the taking all the adults and families. But we have really talked a lot about this with the voluntary sector, primarily against Chelsea Social Council. This has been in the cards before I was lead member, before Mara was here. I think the first paper checking back was back in 2019, pre-pandemic. There was a lot of discussion, and then it was like held back because of the pandemic. So everybody we found is fully aware that there are changes, and in fact they thought they were going to actually happen a lot sooner than they have. So in fact we're actually being more kind of careful of changing the system too quickly than going ahead.
And for the underperforming organisations that we're trying to support, we've been having ongoing discussions with them about the possibility that if they don't do their performance, this is going to be the outcome that their grant might not be extended, or we won't be able to fund them. So they are very much aware of the situation, and we've been having that conversation with them around this round of funding since the spring. We've been having that conversation, and this is for the contract or the grant, if it's going to end, will be next March. So it's been about a year's worth of conversation that we would have with them. They should be prepared.
Can I just ask, do you let a contract for a year, or grant for a year, or do you do it multi-years?
No, actually more than that, because it's
Multi-years. It's 3 years. We can't, and we want some stability in the sector. It's not helpful to
Appreciate
do that by year.
Councillor North, been very patient.
Fascinated to hear these questions. Just two minor questions really. I noticed on page 14, the members of the funders from the Earls Court Olympia Charitable Trust. Is that not included here, or?
They're not part of the funders forum, but we can actually reach out to them to be included.
It's only that I've just joined it myself, and I'm finding out that they're helping towards some funding towards a school in Holland ward. I just thought it might be something to consider.
Yeah.
The only other thing really is a kind of a follow on from my previous question when you were here last time. I'm very keen. I'm great to see the leaflets that are coming out about cost of living and warm hearts. And I just think practically going to the website for some of the people that I'm going to see tomorrow at St Luke's, they would like to see like a simple leaflet, like when they go in their area for that. I know we're getting down towards the end of November, and I think they'll be very useful for churches, community centres, faith groups, voluntary sector, food banks, things like that. I've seen some of the leaflets that Councillor Blake bought to one of their recently. They're great, absolutely great. If we could have a kind of quarter of that size and they were relevant to the area, then people that are in Stanley Ward or whatever ward it is can know that in their area where would they go, because that's the online question I'm getting on a weekly basis.
I'm going to just throw a note of caution to this. On this, we have 72 faith organisations in the borough. All of them are doing lots of amazing work, changing quite rapidly. depending on the need. So one might do a Tuesday morning, coffee morning and a housing forum or something, and then the next week something else. So we're wary of putting all that information out in one central space on the council website. So we're working very closely with the Kensington Chelsea Social Council on this. And we have commissioned to do quite a big piece of work about this and pull all this together. And they're very well linked in with all the voluntary organisations, including the faith organisations as well. So we will try to do our best to be a convener of it. I mean, the piece of work we've been doing about the warm hubs covers some of the faith groups, but not all of them by any means. And we need to come at that. I was looking at a map of it today. We've got loads of kind of points all over the borough. It's missing all the 72, most of the 72 faith ones. So we're asking if we can maybe put that in on the map, but with some kind of caveat that approach them directly to find out exactly when their service is.
I just know that there are a lot of elderly people who won't have access to going on the website.
Exactly.
But would just like to know in their area where do they go when it gets really cold and where they need a bit of TLC and some a cup of tea and all things.
Yeah. Even if it's not comprehensive,
Yes.
it would be good to have at least something. I mean, I can think of a few, but I know that's not exhaustive. So when someone asks me, I'm limited to what I can tell them.
Well, literally just today, I was with Johnny in Council of Thesis, looking at the map, looking at the basis of those sort of days. Literally looking at speaking on those weeks.
Councillor Norton, any other questions?
No.
Yeah, okay, just one left from most of mine came supplementaries, but 3.1, paragraph 3.1, can you just explain what's meant by the statutory provision that counts 40% of the hours social care expenditure? Is that, I presume that's non-discretionary activity,
Yes.
or is it something that could be done in another way other than these grants?
It's not
Other
discretionary.
examples, how long the contracts for, how often are they reviewed, who reviews them, is it lead members, is it officers, or is it something you can't answer because it's so detailed in our social care?
I can answer some of it, but not all of it. So yes, as Sof said, it's non-discretionary. It's the work around safeguarding adults and things like that, and drugs, alcohol support, housing, homelessness support as well, which adult social care does provide some of that. In terms of how often those contracts are tendered, I can speak with the Commissioner and provide a written report.
Yeah, we can ask that. Actually, one thing I think also would probably be good to add to this report is London councils. They, all London councils give a certain amount of money, depending on the size of the census figures, to a grant committee, which is 6 million a year, which goes across all of London. Our contribution, I think, is 116,000 a year, and the committee has decided on two work streams. One is for homelessness, and one is for violence against children and domestic abuse. So that isn't really captured here. So that is something else that as a council we are supporting, and we get in a way quite good value for money because it's London wide, so you can get a lot of economy of scale there. So that's something else that we could probably put as in addition to this.
Okay, thanks very much. Any follow-ups from the committee?
Oh, I just did want to mention, I didn't mention it before because they're not mentioned in the report, but since you raised it, Councillor Gardner, I am a trustee of a Citizens Advice KNC. I just want to put that on the record. But yeah, it happens.
Yeah, we'll have that noted.
And in that case, I should also know that I'm a trustee of the space.
Thank you, we'll note that one as well, Councillor Gardner. There's obviously an awful lot of these organisations
civic
that are involved.
minded.
Are there any questions from the floor, gentlemen? Okay, there's just one other thing. I think paragraph 8.1, that was a rather thought-provoking one you entered your report with. Bullet 1, the committee's role in the suggestions that we have on shaping the future of BCS grants. Well, I mean, first point, we're a scrutiny committee, so we scrutinise what you do, as opposed to decide it. But equally, shaping policy, we can do things on that front. It was something I discussed with a previous lead member about 18 months ago about the possibility of doing a working group to look at the voluntary sector support funds to see where it was going, what duplications there were, were there any overlaps. it sounded like quite a good idea, but it didn't really get beyond that conversation. I think that the chair didn't, well, there were other priorities that the chair took forward for, I think it might have been the last council year, not this council year, and of course none of the rest of this committee here today were involved in that conversation, but it's potentially something that we could do in the next council year as a subject if committee members were minded to have found this an interesting and high priority subject. There's obviously a lot of calls on our time, but we have the potential to do a working group on this front, and it might help inform your policy development.
I think that would be helpful. I'm mindful that if it's just on the VSSF, probably would be, can't think of the time frame when we're actually having to kind of, re-commission again, kind of go out to,
It's from September, to open the new round, the next round, whatever that may be, whatever format it takes from September.
So something along those lines, kind of priorities along those lines, council plan. Which could influence who gets successful in the next funding round.
And well, you'll be aware that the work from this committee would start in September next year, because by the time we've got through committee elections, the summer, deciding what the work programme, you actually start doing the work in September and you report around March. So we're talking 2023 to 24. But I guess there is a potential for this committee to do something on that front if we collectively were minded to do that.
Or on the monitoring.
Or our successors next year. If we're not in this committee, of course.
Yeah.
I'll throw that out there. Does anybody have any observations they want to add on that?
I just have one question in reverse, is what do you do with the monitoring data? Do you produce an annual report? So other than checking individual charities' performance and checking whether they're using money well, what do you do with it publicly?
Which ones is publicly?
What do you put out in the domain on residents and other?
I think probably the group of funding could use it, I thought. I mean, for us, it provides us a very simple, easy way to kind of, suddenly see if there's any red flags.
Yes, but that then goes back to actually you're asking for too much information to do that job. But actually, should you be doing it the other way? And if you are collecting lots of data, why aren't you doing more with it? If you're going to ask for it, then is either ask for less or do something with it. Challenge for you.
That's a good point, it's a very good point. And on the feedback that you got from James, I'll be honest, we've got that feedback for each VCS organization I've had a conversation with. That's the feedback, that it is a lot of work. And
that's why we've had that meeting.
Yeah, so it's streamlining. We've got someone like the Delgado Trust that has 7 different arrangements with the council. Reporting back on all of that takes up so much of their time.
Yeah, it's not fair.
Last chance, right?
I just had a thought on what you said earlier. I suppose one issue with the committee taking more of a role in shaping the future of grants rather than, say, elite members, there might be split views amongst different members of the committee of where priorities should be. So, I mean, just perhaps one thing to think about.
Yeah, I doubt if the committee could get down to that level of detail. But yes, that reason, because everyone's got a different view and they're decision makers.
Yeah.
And I would say that the priorities, obviously, are going to be the council plan priorities rather than priorities coming out of Swansea.
Very good. Well, thank you both very much, the lead member and the director, and you will let me walk the vote.
Thank you.
Wish you a good night. And for us, we're on to item 8, which is the work programme. Is there anything we need to go tracking?
No.
Right. Item 9 is any other oral or written items which the chair considers to be urgent. I haven't been notified of anything, so it can be very compelling indeed for me to attend it. And I'm going to pause for a very short time. There's nothing, so that's that. Jackie's asked me to remind the newly elected councillors is training tomorrow night and asking questions and scrutiny, which I guess you've all done well tonight, so I expect you'll be delivering the training, not receiving it, but it's always good to do some training and also for